Imagine this. It's just after sunset, and the deep, shadowy forest around you. The air is thick, humid, and the faint smell of rain clings to the trees. Your flashlight barely cuts through the mist creeping in from all sides, casting long, distorted shadows across the forest floor. You're alone, but you have that unmistakable feeling. You're not really alone. Somewhere in the distance, you hear it. A twig snapping, then silence. Every fiber of your being tells you to stop walking, but curiosity wins, and you push forward. A creature haunts these woods, and when you find out what it is, you're gonna want to Google it. Today, we're diving into one of the creepiest legends you've probably never heard of. It's about a creature called the Tikbalang, a creature with the head of a horse and the body of a man from Filipino folklore that's said to stalk the dense, dark forest. It's known for leading people astray, trapping them in a maze of trees, and, if the stories are to be believed, never letting them out. But more importantly, we'll ask the question, could the Tikbalang be more than just a legend? Is there something real lurking in the forest? Watching, waiting. If you thought you knew everything about this haunting figure, think again. This story goes deeper than you might expect. So grab your flashlight, toilet paper, and stay close. You're gonna need it. There's a little town in the Philippines, a town so small you wouldn't even find it on a map unless you knew exactly where to look. And like all little towns, it has its stories. The kind passed down over fires and whispered in hushed voices when the kids have gone to bed. Stories of spirits and creatures that lurk in the forest and the deep, dark places where the trees grow so thick you can barely see the sky. In this village, they have one story that stands out above all the rest. A story about something ancient, something old as the dirt beneath your feet. People have always been superstitious, and for good reason. That forest, it's not like the ones you're probably used to. No, it's dark, oppressive, and filled with something else. Something old. But in this village, there was one young man named Juan who didn't buy into all the talk of spirits and monsters. Despite the warnings of the elders who knew better than to mess with the forest, Juan would always laugh and shrug it off. The Tikbalang? To him, it was just another scary bedtime story meant to keep kids from wandering too far. One day, a group of villagers set out to gather firewood, and Juan decided to go along with them. It was a simple, everyday task, but from the moment they stepped into the forest, things started to feel off. The trees towered above them like walls, and the deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. You know that eerie silence when everything just stops? Yeah, that. As they gathered wood, the group noticed that Juan had wandered off on his own. He was always the type to do his own thing, so at first, no one was too concerned. But as the hours ticked by and the sun began to sink lower in the sky, Juan still hadn't come back. That's when the fear started to set in. They called his name over and over, but there was no response. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed to swallow their voices. Now, the villagers, they knew better than to stay in the forest after dark. It was said that once the sun sets, that's when the Tikbalang comes out. So they did what they thought was best. They started searching. They spread out, scouring the area, calling for Juan, but it was like he had vanished. No tracks, no sound, nothing. For days, the villagers searched, but there was no trace of him. People started to say what they had all been thinking, that the Tikbalang had taken him. And in this village, when someone is taken, they're never seen again. As the days passed, Juan began to believe in the stories he had once laughed off. He'd heard the elders speak of the Tikbalang, how it played tricks on travelers, leading them in circles until they were hopelessly lost. But there was one thing they always said. If you find yourself lost, turn your shirt inside out. It confuses the Tikbalang and breaks its spell. Desperate and afraid, Juan did just that. At first, nothing changed, but then slowly, the forest began to feel less oppressive. 3 days later, he found his way out, stumbling back into the village, just as the stories promised. His body battered, his clothes torn, and his eyes were hollow, distant like he had seen something no human should ever see. The villagers rushed to him, asking, "What happened? Where have you been?" But Juan couldn't remember everything. He couldn't explain the bruises on his body or why his clothes looked like they had been dragged through the forest. All he could recall was the feeling of being watched, constantly. And one thing: the sound of hooves. He said he heard them everywhere he went, echoing through the trees, slow and deliberate, following him no matter how far he ran. But no matter how many times he turned around, there was nothing there. Only the oppressive darkness of the forest and the eerie silence that clung to him like a second skin. Since that day, Juan was never the same. He wouldn't go near the forest anymore, not even during the day. And whenever someone brought up the Tikbalang, his face would go pale, and he'd find a reason to leave. He never spoke of what he saw, but everyone in the village knew. Whatever was out there in those woods had marked him. And so every night, Juan sits and listens. Because somewhere out there, deep in the woods where the light never reaches, something is listening back. Something with hooves. Something waiting. So what even is a Tikbalang? It is one of the most well-known figures in Filipino folklore, but it's far from the most understood. Descriptions of this creature go back centuries, long before Spanish colonization of the Philippines. The Tikbalang is depicted as a towering figure, often more than 7 feet tall. If that doesn't make your skin crawl, its glowing orange eyes will. Its skin, according to some legends, is as rough as tree bark, and its long limbs are unnaturally skinny. It is said to possess an eerie stride, moving on its hooves in a manner that is both silent and unnatural. Some say it's the spirit of a person who was denied a proper burial, wandering the earth in a twisted, monstrous form. Others believe it's as old as the forests themselves, tasked with guarding the wilderness from human intrusion. But could the Tikbalang's legend be hiding something far more terrifying than simple trickery? A recent encounter might reveal the truth. Maria was walking home one night after spending the evening with friends in her small village. It was a quiet night, one of those nights where the world feels completely still, the kind of stillness that makes every little sound stand out. Maria had walked this path countless times before, and it was usually a peaceful, uneventful journey. But that night, something was off. As she made her way down the road ahead, she started to hear footsteps behind her. At first, she brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just one of the village kids, or maybe even an animal. But the steps didn't have that light, quick rhythm you'd expect from a child. No, these were heavier, more deliberate. Like each step was being carefully placed. She quickened her pace, and the footsteps did the same, staying just far enough behind her that she couldn't quite see who, or what, was following. Now Maria wasn't the type to scare easily, but the sound of those footsteps, it started to nod her. There was something wrong about it, something that made her gut tighten in fear. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She stopped and turned around, expecting to see a small figure, maybe a child playing some kind of prank. But what she saw stopped her cold. The child she thought she had heard, gone. Just this monstrous figure, watching her, and its grin was wrong, almost too wide, as if it was mocking her fear. Maria's heart raced, and before she even realized what she was doing, she turned and ran. She sprinted down the road as fast as her legs could carry her, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her mind screaming for her to keep going. But no matter how fast she ran, those footsteps, the same heavy, deliberate steps, were always right behind her, like the creature was toying with her. And then she heard it. Laughter. The creature's hooves barely made a sound on the pavement. It was almost as if it wasn't really there, like it was a shadow, almost one step behind, no matter how far or how fast she ran. Maria made it home. She slammed the door behind her and collapsed, her body shaking, her mind reeling. But the Tikbalang was gone. Just like that, it had vanished, leaving her alone in that silent darkness of her house. But here's one thing. Maria didn't forget what happened that night. In fact, she says it never really left her. To this day, she claims she can still hear the Tikbalang's laugh in her dreams. That same cruel, mocking laughter that haunts her every night, reminding her that she was marked by something ancient, something that wasn't supposed to be real. Every time she walks that road, she can feel it. the eyes in the darkness, the presence just behind her, watching. So what's the deal with the Tikbalang? Well, there are a few theories. Some say it's a symbol of nature, a guardian of the forest, representing the wild, untamed power of the natural world. Others think it's a psychological manifestation, an expression of our primal fears of the unknown, a way to explain the things we can't control or understand. There's also the idea that it's a trickster, and the stories of his pranks come from people trying to make sense of strange or unpredictable events. And then there's the social angle. These stories get passed down, reinforced by community belief, making the Tikbalang feel all the more real. Some researchers have even tried to debunk the myth, suggesting that it could be based on something as simple as pareidolia, where our minds see similar shapes in the shadows. Or maybe it's linked to the arrival of the horses in the Philippines, making the idea of the horse-headed creature feel mysterious and foreign. Ultimately, whether it's a cultural symbol, a psychological projection, or just folklore, the Tikbalang continues to haunt the imagination. And who knows, maybe next time you're out in the woods and you hear the sound of hooves, you'll think twice before brushing it off. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the Philippines' most chilling legends, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more, and as always, try not to fall down another rabbit hole.